She wed a man in patch boots to feed her sisters. He owned 3 cattle ranches. The boots were real. I want to be clear about that because after everything came out, people assumed the whole thing was some kind of scheme. It wasn't. The boots were just boots, old ones, resoled twice, the left heel worn down from the way I favor that leg when I stand fence line. I'd worn better and I'd worn worse, and somewhere along the way I stopped thinking about it. A man works cattle, he dresses for cattle. What you wear to the sale barn isn't what you wear to church, and I wasn't going to church that day. I was buying a wife. Not the way that sounds. I'm trying to say it plain, and I know it doesn't come out plain, but that's what I was doing, in the way it was done back then in that part of the country, going to see about a woman who'd put the word out through her preacher that she needed a husband. Not wanted. Needed. There's a difference, and she was honest about it, which was the first thing I respected about Clara Voss before I'd ever laid eyes on her. She had 3 younger sisters. Their father was 18 months in the ground, consumption. Their mother had died when the youngest was born. The farm, if you could call it that, 40-odd acres of Rocky Hill country that God himself seemed to have given up on, was mortgaged against a note coming due in 60 days. The preacher, a man named Hollowell, had been straightforward in his letter. Miss Voss was not looking for romance. She was looking for a man with enough land and enough cattle to absorb her sisters into a household. She would work. She would be a good wife. She was not, the letter said, without her own opinions, and any man expecting a quiet, biddable woman should look elsewhere. I'd read that line twice. Then I'd folded the letter, put it in my coat pocket, and ridden out the next morning. I should tell you something about where I was at that point in my life, because otherwise you won't understand why I went the way I went. I was 43 years old. I had built starting from a bedroll and $30, and a lot of years I don't like to think about too long 3 cattle operations across 2 counties. The home ranch, the Creole place I'd bought out of a bankruptcy in '79, and a summer grazing lease up in the high pastures that I ran under a separate brand, 1,200 head of mixed stock on good years. I employed 9 men steady, more during gather. The bank in Harlan knew my name before I walked in the door, which is a thing that takes time to build and can go away faster than you think, so I never stopped working like it could. I was not a poor man. Most people in 2 counties knew I was not a poor man. That was the problem. There had been a woman 4 years before that. I won't go into it in detail because it still sits in me wrong and because she doesn't deserve to be talked about badly even now. What I'll say is this. I found out, not from her directly but from a thing I overheard at the feed store in Harlan, that she had told her friend her words, not mine, that she didn't love me especially, but that the ranch was a good situation and she wasn't getting any younger. She said she thought I was decent enough. Decent enough. I had asked her to marry me 2 weeks before that. She hadn't answered yet. She never did because I never asked again. After that I became careful in a way I hadn't been before. Careful about what I drove into town. Careful about which coat I wore, which horse I rode when I wasn't on business. I kept a pair of working boots, cracked and resoled and honest, and I wore them most days. It probably looked strange to some people. I didn't care. I needed to know if I ever stood in front of a woman again and thought about asking her something, that I knew what she was answering yes to. So when Hollowell's letter came, and it described a woman who needed a man with land and cattle to feed her family, and who was honest enough to say so outright, with no pretense of romance, I thought, here is a transaction I can understand. Both sides knowing what they're getting. Both sides walking in clear. I did not expect anything more than that. I went in my working boots. The Voss place was everything the letter had implied. The fence posts were leaning. The barn roof had a tarp over one corner held down by a wagon wheel someone had hauled up there, and that was a better solution than it sounds, actually. It was still holding. The house was small, weathered to the color of old bone, but the yard was swept clean and there was wood stacked neat against the south wall, and the stoop had been recently whitewashed, bright white in the October sun, which I noticed. A woman was splitting wood at the side of the house. She didn't stop when I rode up. She set one more round, split it, stacked the two halves, then set her axe in the block and turned around. Clara Voss was, I don't know the right word, not beautiful in the way that word usually gets used. Her hair was dark, pinned up, and a piece of it had come loose across her cheek from the work. She was lean the way people get lean who don't always have enough, but she stood up straight, and she looked at me, not at my horse, not at the state of my gear. She looked at my face, straight and steady, the way you look at someone you are trying to get the honest measure of. "Mr. Aldrin," she said. "Miss Voss." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll put coffee on. Preacher Hollowell said you might come." "He said you wanted someone who knew what they were walking into," I said, "on both sides." Something shifted in her face, not a smile exactly, but a kind of relief. "Come in, then." We talked for 2 hours at her kitchen table. She did not pretty it up. She laid it out like a ledger. 3 sisters, ages 9, 13, and 16. The 9-year-old Delia had weak lungs and needed to be indoors come winter. The 16-year-old Nora was capable and would pull her weight on a ranch. She wanted me to know that. The 13-year-old me was the one who kept the younger ones from falling apart. Clara said this with something in her voice that was both proud and sorry. She told me the mortgage figure. She told me what was owed at the dry goods. She told me that she would not lie to me and that she expected the same. I asked her what she expected from a husband. She thought about it. "Someone who doesn't make things harder than they already are," she said finally. I liked that answer. I told her I had a ranch. I said it had land and cattle and enough room. I did not tell her how much land. I did not tell her about the Creel place or the summer lease. I told her I could cover the mortgage and the dry goods and that her sisters could come. I said I was not looking for something soft or easy. I was looking for someone who would work alongside me and be straight with me. She nodded slowly. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Aldrin." "What did you expect?" "Older," she said, "or richer looking. Hollowell said you were well situated." She glanced down at my boots, then back up, and there was nothing unkind in it, just a woman taking stock. "I suppose well situated means different things." I didn't say anything to that. "It doesn't matter to me," she said, and she said it flat and clear, not generous, just factual. "I'm not marrying a ledger book. I'm marrying a man who'll work and who'll be honest. If you're that, it's enough." I rode home that evening and sat on my porch until after dark. Then I sent word to Hollowell that I'd like to proceed. We married on a Thursday in November at the Harlan Church, which was small and cold, and had a wood stove that Hollowell kept threatening to replace, and never did. Clara wore a dark blue dress that I would learn later she'd let out twice and taken in once as it passed between herself and her sisters over the years. Her sister Nora stood up with her. I had one of my hands, a man named Cutter who'd been with me 8 years, stand up for me. There was no party. Clara had made a small cake, white with a dried flower pressed into the top, and her sisters ate it at the church, and then we loaded them and what they owned into my wagon and drove north. I watched Clara's face as we came up the last rise before the home ranch came into view. She saw the house first, 2 stories stone-built, with the covered porch I'd put on the south side for the hot months. Then the barn. Then, as we came around the long curve of the drive, the second pasture opened up and there were cattle there, a couple 100 head wintering in the lower field. She didn't say anything. We crossed the yard, and I helped her down from the wagon. She stood in the dirt of the yard and looked around at the bunkhouse, at the equipment shed, at the smoke coming from the cookhouse chimney, where my ranch cook, Etta, had a meal going because I'd sent word ahead. "This is yours," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's ours now." She turned and looked at me for a long moment, and I could see it happening in her face, the recalculation, the boots, the working coat, the way I'd spoken about the ranch without numbers. She was putting it together. "How much?" she said. "Enough," I said. No, she had a very particular way of saying that word, not harsh, just final. "How much, Mr. Aldrin?" So I told her. Not everything, not that first night, but the home ranch acreage and the cattle count. I watched her face go still in a way that I had seen on men when they heard news they hadn't prepared for. Then she did something I did not expect. She laughed. Not the laugh of someone embarrassed or deceived, a real laugh, short and a little tired. She pressed her hand to her forehead. "Patch boots," she said. "They're good boots." "They are terrible boots." "I didn't want," I started. "I know what you didn't want," she said. She looked at me again, steadier now. "I'm not angry. I told you at the table that it didn't matter, and I meant it. I meant it when I thought you had 100 head and a leaky barn, and I mean it now." She paused. "I just want to know who I married. That's all." We stood in the yard while her sisters ran toward the barn because Nora had spotted horses. "You married a man who works cattle," I said. "That part was true." She nodded, looked at the house, then back at me. "All right," she said, "show me where things are." I want to tell it honestly, because the story of how two people come to understand each other is never the clean version, and anyone who tells you otherwise is leaving out the part that mattered. The first weeks were careful. Clara was not a woman who softened quickly or trusted easily, and I was not a man who opened up easily, and we were both working from a place of so much practicality that we were nearly formal with each other. She learned the house and the household accounts, which I had always run out of a ledger I kept in a drawer in the office, and which she reorganized inside a week in a way that I had to admit was better. She won over Etta the cook inside 3 days by some method I never fully understood. Her sister Nora was already in love with every horse on the place. Delia, the youngest, slept better than she had in months, according to Clara, because the house was warm. I watched her work. That's what I noticed most, not any one thing but the accumulation of it. The way she could walk into a situation, a problem with the supply account, Nora having a difficult day, a broken fence run that the men hadn't gotten to, and assess it and act on it without theater. She didn't announce what she was doing or explain herself or wait for approval. She just handled things. I had been running a ranch alone for a long time. I had gotten used to doing everything myself, which is both a strength and a kind of loneliness you stop noticing. I was starting to notice it again. The thing that broke it open happened in January. I'd been in Harlan for 3 days on business. The sale barn, the bank, a meeting with a man named Garrett about the summer lease that was getting complicated in ways I won't go into here. I came back late on a Wednesday night, cold and tired, to find the home ranch hands at the bunkhouse and a light on in the house, which was normal. What was not normal was Cutter sitting at my kitchen table with a bandage on his forearm, and Clara across from him with a bowl and clean cloth, and that particular expression she got when she was concentrating hard on something she meant to get right. Cutter's horse had gone down on the ice road in the north pasture. He'd been thrown, landed badly, horse rolled partway over his arm. The arm wasn't broken, but it was a mess, and it had happened 2 hours after dark, and there were no other men nearby. Clara had heard the horse. I don't know how, the bunkhouse is a distance from the house, but she'd heard something wrong in it, and she'd gone out with a lantern, found Cutter in the road, gotten the horse up and tied, and walked Cutter back in the dark. She'd been cleaning the wound for the last hour. I stood in the doorway in my coat, and she looked up at me and said, "He's all right. Sit down, I'll heat up supper." Cutter looked at me over her head, with an expression I can't describe except to say it was the expression of a man who has seen something he did not expect. I sat down. Later, after Cutter had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was quiet, I said to her, "You didn't have to do that." She was washing the bowl at the sink. She glanced back at me. "He works for you. He got hurt on your land, of course I did." A lot of women wouldn't have gone out in the dark. A lot of women haven't needed to, she said simply. I sat at that table for a while after she'd gone upstairs. The lamp was burning low. Outside it was cold, clear, the kind of January night that makes everything very still and sharp. I thought about what decent enough had felt like when I'd heard it said about me. Then I thought about what it felt like to come home to a house where something had gone wrong and been handled, and the light was on. I told her about the other ranch in March. Not because I'd been hiding it, she'd have found it in the account soon enough, but because March was when the Creel Place business came to a head. There was a boundary dispute with the neighbor to the east, a man named Ashford who had been testing that line for 2 years. I was riding out to meet the county surveyor, and I told Clara where I was going and why. She listened to all of it. She asked one question: whether Ashford was the kind of man who would push past the survey line even after it was settled, or whether the law would hold him. I looked at her. Why, I said. Because if he's the pushing kind, you'll want to fence that line within 30 days of the survey, not wait until spring. Fenced line is different in his mind than a paper line. She paused. My father had a neighbor like that. I went to the Creel Place with the surveyor and I watched Ashford's face when the stakes went in, and I thought, she's right, he's the pushing kind. We fenced that line in 3 weeks. I told her she'd read him correctly. She shrugged and said she'd seen the type before. But I saw something in her face, just for a second, and it was not vanity about being right. It was something quieter, like a woman who had been capable for a long time and had not particularly been asked. The summer lease I told her about in May, when we rode up to look at the high pastures before the cattle went up. We were on the ridge above the summer camp. The whole valley spread out below us, still brown from the late snow, and I pointed out the lease boundary and told her what I paid and what I ran up there and what it returned. She was quiet for a while. 3 ranches, she said. One's a lease. Still, I agreed. She looked at the valley. You must have worked very hard. I did. And been careful. That too. She turned on her horse and looked at me directly, the way she had that first day in the yard when she was putting it together. Were you ever going to tell me if I hadn't asked? The accounts would have told you, and I wasn't hiding it. I didn't have a clean word for it. I needed to know who you were before I knew you knew. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of it, the question under the question, which was, who am I to you, and who are you to me? And are we going to keep standing across from each other at a polite distance until one of us dies? The boots, she said. What about them? I knew the second week, she said. They're good quality underneath the wear, the leather. A poor man doesn't buy leather like that. She paused. I didn't say anything because it didn't matter. I'd meant what I said. She looked away across the valley, then back. I want you to know that I didn't marry the ranches, Mr. Aldrin. I had not asked her to stop calling me Mr. Aldrin. We were 5 months married and she still called me Mr. Aldrin, not from coldness but from the way she'd been raised, and I had come to like it, the formality of it that was not actually formal anymore, just hers. What did you marry? I said. She thought about it, not performing thought, actually thinking, the way she did everything. A man who wore bad boots on purpose, she said, because he wanted to know if it would matter. She looked at me steadily, and there it was, what I hadn't been able to name, what I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting, the clear eyes of a woman who saw exactly what she'd chosen and was not sorry for it. It didn't. It doesn't, I want you to know that. We sat on that ridge for a while without speaking, which was something we had gotten good at by then. A comfortable quiet, the kind that takes time to earn between 2 people who don't give themselves easily. Below us, the valley was coming green at the edges, where the snow had pulled back. There is a thing that happens to a man who has worked alone a long time, and the thing is this. He forgets that working alone was a choice he made because it was safer, and he starts to think it's just who he is. He builds walls and then forgets the walls are walls and thinks they are just him, just his shape. I had been alone for going on 6 years before Clara. I did not know how much I had closed down until she started, slowly and without making a production of it, opening things back up. Not by pushing, not by asking me to talk about things I didn't want to talk about, just by being present in the particular, certain way she was present, by handling things, by being straight, by never once in all our time together telling me what she thought I wanted to hear when it wasn't true. And by seeing me. That's the thing I keep coming back to, being seen. Not the ranch, not the cattle count, not the stone house or the summer lease. Not decent enough. Me, the man who'd worn bad boots on purpose because he'd learned the hard way that he needed to know. The man who'd built all of it slowly and then didn't know what to do with it. The man who'd ridden out to a farm with a leaking barn because a preacher's letter had described a woman who was honest, and who needed a man who'd work alongside her and be straight with her, and who had read that and thought, that, I know how to do. She saw that man. And she'd chosen him before she knew about the other 2 ranches. I'll jump forward now because a story can't hold 80 years of a life, and I'm not going to try. The first real winter together, January of '84, which was bad. You might have heard of it if you know that part of the country. 3 weeks of cold that killed cattle from here to the territories. We lost some. Not as many as our neighbors because we'd pushed hay reserves in November when I could see what was coming, and Clara had insisted we cut more than I'd planned to. I'd pushed back on the cost of it. She'd been quiet for a moment and then said, "More than you think." I cut more than I'd planned to. We made it through with our breeding stock whole, which was not nothing that year. We didn't talk about it when it was over. But one morning in late February, she came out to the barn where I was working on a halter with cracked leather, and she handed me a cup of coffee, and she stood beside me in the barn door looking at the pasture where the surviving cattle were picking at the last of the hay, and she put her hand on my arm. Just that. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But she stood there beside me in that cold barn door with her hand on my arm and her shoulder touching my shoulder, and I set down the halter, and I put my hand over hers. That was the winter the walls came down, I think. What I want to tell you, the part of this that I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count, is about a morning in the spring of that second year. Her sisters were settled by then. Nora had taken to the ranch work the way some people take to water, natural and quick and always wanting more. Me had found her footing in the household and in school in Harlan. Delia's lungs were better, the second winter much easier on her than the first. Clara watched all of it with a steady satisfaction that she didn't wear loudly, but I had learned to read her. We were at breakfast, the 2 of us alone because the girls had already gone out. She was reading a letter from a woman she knew in the next county, I don't remember who, and I was looking over the week's work in my head the way I did most mornings. And she looked up from the letter and looked at me. Not for any reason, not because I'd said anything, just looked at me the way sometimes, without prompting, she would look at me, steady and warm and clear-eyed, with that quality she had of seeing a thing as it actually was. I said, "What?" She said nothing and went back to the letter. But she was almost smiling. And I thought, I remember this clearly, the taste of the coffee and the light coming in the east window and the sound of Nora already at work in the yard. I thought, this is it. This is the thing I went looking for in the bad boots, in the careful years, in the riding out to a farm on a cold October morning to sit at a stranger's table and talk about what both of you needed and expected. This. A woman who chose you when she thought you had a leaky barn and 100 head, who stood by you in a bad winter and helped you through it and never held it over you, who saw through the boots inside 2 weeks and didn't say anything because it didn't matter to her, who organized your ledger and read your neighbor right and went out in the dark with a lantern because a man was hurt and he worked for you, who looked up from a letter for no reason and looked at you like that. I was 61 when I gave the Creel place to Nora and her husband. They'd been running it for 3 years by then, honestly, and it was always going to be theirs. At the signing, Nora looked at her sister and Clara looked back, and something passed between them that I could not read, which is usually the signal that the important thing has already been said without me present. The home ranch I still run, though slower now. Cutter retired 6 years back, and there are younger men who do what Cutter did, and I watch them and try not to tell them they're doing it wrong when they're not actually doing it wrong, just differently. Clara and I sit on the south porch in the evenings when the weather allows. She has her mending or her reading. I have my coffee and my view of the pasture. The cattle are there, same as always, the same and not the same, one generation turned into the next. She still calls me Mr. Aldrin sometimes. I never told her to stop. Someone asked me once, a young man, one of the Harlan banker's sons who'd heard the story from somewhere and gotten it half wrong. He asked me if it bothered me, the way it had started. A transaction, he said, with a slight edge to it, like a man making a point. I thought about the kitchen table at her father's farm, the ledger she laid out, the sisters, the mortgage number, the way she'd said, "I'm not marrying a ledger book. I'm marrying a man who'll work and who'll be honest. If you're that, it's enough." I thought about the barn door in February. I thought about her looking up from the letter. I said to him, a transaction is two people walking in clear about what they're bringing and what they need and what they're willing to give. Most marriages, I said, start with a lot of decoration over the top of that, and then the decoration falls off eventually and you find out what was underneath it. We just started with what was underneath. He didn't look entirely satisfied with the answer. I didn't need him to be. The boots, for the record, are still in the mudroom. Not those exact ones, those fell apart the winter of '87, and I replaced them with a pair from the same cobbler. Clara saw the new pair and said nothing, but when I came in from evening chores that first week, she'd set them on the boot rack alongside hers with the heels lined up, the way you set things you intend to keep. I noticed that. I notice everything she does is the truth of it. Still, after all these years, I notice. The home ranch is quieter now than it was. Some days the quiet is just quiet, the particular piece of a life that came out right against the odds of it coming out wrong. Some mornings I stand in the barn door where she stood beside me in that cold February long ago, and I look out at the same pasture, different cattle, and I feel the weight of everything that was built here. Not just the fences and the stock and the stone house, but the other kind of building, the kind that happens between two people over time, the kind you can't account for in a ledger. I didn't know what I was riding toward that October morning with my bad boots and my careful heart. I know now. She set her boots on the rack beside mine, heels lined up, the way you set things you intend to keep. That's all, that's everything.